There's something in your house right now that you cannot see. Not something dark, not something threatening, something ancient, something assigned, something that has been standing guard over the threshold of your home since the moment you were born, and most people live their entire lives without ever once noticing it is there. I want to tell you about the 3 signs, not the signs you read about in devotional pamphlets, not the comfortable, vague assurances that everything is fine. I am talking about the specific, concrete, verifiable signs documented across centuries of Catholic mystical tradition, confirmed through the accounts of saints who saw with eyes the rest of us have stopped using, that tell you with a precision that should stop you cold whether the angels of God are present and active in your home right now. Because here is what I have learned after decades in this ministry. Most homes are not defended the way their inhabitants believe they are. And most people would not recognize the presence of a guardian angel if it was standing 3 feet away from them. Stay with me through all of this. Because what I'm going to share in the next several minutes may be the most clarifying thing you have heard about the spiritual life in years. And I mean clarifying in both directions. It will show you what protection looks like when it is real, and it will force you to ask a very serious question about whether what you currently have in your home qualifies. The world you cannot see. Let me begin with something the modern world has worked very hard to make you forget. The universe is larger than you can perceive. Not in the astrophysical sense, though that is true as well. In the ontological sense. In the sense of what actually exists. The Catholic tradition, drawing from Scripture, from the councils of the Church, from the testimony of the saints across 20 centuries, teaches with absolute clarity that the visible world you inhabit is surrounded by, interpenetrated by, and in constant contact with an invisible world that is neither metaphor nor mythology. It is real. It is populated. And it is paying very close attention to what happens in your home, in your family, and in your soul. The angels are not fairy tale figures. They are not the soft-winged, gender-neutral decorations you find on greeting cards. They are vast, powerful, intelligent beings of pure spirit whose existence predates the creation of the physical universe. When the book of Job describes the sons of God shouting for joy at the laying of the earth's foundation, it is describing beings who were already ancient when the first atom of matter came into existence. And God, in his extraordinary providence, has assigned particular angels to particular human souls. This is not pious speculation. The Church teaches it. Scripture confirms it in the words of Christ himself, who says in the Gospel of Matthew that the little ones have angels in heaven who always behold the face of the Father. Always. Not occasionally. Not when they remember. Always. Your guardian angel has never stopped looking at the face of God on your behalf. That is not a devotional sentiment. That is a theological statement about an ongoing supernatural reality that is happening right now as you sit wherever you are sitting, in whatever condition your soul is in. The question, and this is the question I want you to hold throughout everything I'm about to say, is not whether the angel is there. The question is whether your home has created the conditions in which that angel can work. Because that distinction matters enormously, and almost no one talks about it. What the tradition tells us. I want to take you into territory that the contemporary church rarely visits with any depth because it makes people uncomfortable. It requires admitting that the spiritual world operates according to principles, that those principles have practical consequences, and that not every home is spiritually equivalent regardless of what the family believes about themselves. The mystical tradition of the Church is precise about this. The saints who had extraordinary access to the invisible world, and I am thinking here of figures like Padre Pio, of St. Gemma Galgani, of the Cure of Ars, of countless others whose accounts have been examined and ratified by the Church across centuries. These individuals did not describe angelic presence as uniformly distributed across all environments equally. They described it as responsive. This word matters. Responsive. The angelic presence in a home, the degree to which a guardian angel can operate with full force and full effect in and around the people it is assigned to protect, is not fixed. It is not automatic. It is not independent of the spiritual condition of the home and the souls within it. This is not a cause for despair. I want to be clear about that immediately because I know how this can be heard. This is not God withdrawing his protection as punishment. God does not work that way. This is more like the difference between a fire that has been given fuel, oxygen, and a proper hearth, and a fire that has been slowly starved of all three. The fire wants to burn. The conditions either help it or hinder it. The angelic mission assigned to each soul wants to be fulfilled. The question is always whether the conditions of a life and of a home are the kind that fan the flame or quietly smother it. Now, here's where I need you to understand something that changed the way I look at the cases I have encountered in this ministry. For many years, I approached spiritual warfare primarily from the perspective of threat. What is attacking? What doors have been opened? What ground has the enemy claimed? These are real and urgent questions, and I still ask them. But I have come to understand that there is an equally important frame, and it is the frame of presence rather than absence. Not just what darkness has entered, but also what light is being blocked. Because sometimes the most significant spiritual problem in a home is not that something demonic has moved in. It is that the angelic activity that should be overwhelming the constant, powerful, grace-saturated ministry of creatures who stand before the face of God has been reduced to a kind of spiritual whisper in an environment so loud with the world's noise that even a whisper of heaven cannot be heard. And that is exactly what the enemy wants. He does not always need to attack directly. Sometimes he simply needs to fill the space so completely with distraction, with noise, with moral compromise, with the slow erosion of prayer, that the angelic presence in a home goes from a roaring fire to an ember. The family living in that home still has a guardian angel, but they cannot feel it, they cannot perceive it, and they have no idea what they are missing. This is the situation I believe describes the majority of Christian homes in the Western world today. Not possessed. Not infested in the classical sense, but spiritually impoverished in a way that leaves them far more vulnerable than they know. So then, the 3 signs. I want to be precise about what I mean when I describe these signs because I'm not speaking of extraordinary mystical phenomena available only to saints. I am speaking of signs that are accessible to ordinary people living ordinary lives, signs that the tradition identifies as markers of genuine, active, unobstructed angelic presence in a home. The absence of these signs is not a condemnation. It is a diagnosis, and diagnoses are useful. The first sign, an atmosphere of peace that has no natural explanation. The first sign, and in some ways the most difficult for the modern mind to grasp precisely because it is so simple, is this, a particular quality of peace. Not the peace that comes from financial security. Not the peace that comes from the absence of conflict on any given Tuesday. Not the warm feeling you get when the house is clean and dinner is ready and everyone is behaving. Those are natural goods and they are real, but they are not what I am describing. I am describing a peace that persists underneath chaos. A peace that is present during illness, during financial pressure, during the ordinary crushing difficulty of raising a family in a world that seems bent on destroying everything sacred. A peace that people who visit the home sometimes notice before they can name it. A peace that the family itself often cannot fully explain, except to say that in spite of everything, there is something here that holds. The tradition calls this the peace of God that surpasses all understanding, and the apostle describes it precisely that way, as surpassing understanding, because it does not come from circumstances. It comes from proximity to beings who stand permanently in the presence of God. The guardian angel operating freely in a home brings something of heaven's atmosphere with it. This is not romantic language. This is theological precision about what angels are, what they carry, and what their presence does to the spiritual environment around them. St. Thomas Aquinas, working from Scripture and from the tradition before him, describes the angels as participating so fully in the divine beatitude that their very presence communicates something of that beatitude to the souls near them. Not in the direct way that God communicates grace, but in a secondary, participatory way that the tradition consistently associates with consolation, with spiritual courage, with the particular gift of interior quiet in the midst of exterior disorder. When Padre Pio was asked about his guardian angel, he described the angel's presence with language that people who had spent time near Padre Pio himself would have recognized as analogous to what they experienced near him, a quality of recollection, of depth, of something settling in the soul. Now, why do some homes have this and others do not? This is where the diagnosis becomes important. The atmosphere of supernatural peace is not produced by the mere presence of a guardian angel, because the guardian angel is always present. It is produced by the unobstructed ministry of the guardian angel, and that ministry is obstructed primarily by 2 things: serious, unconfessed sin and the sustained absence of prayer. Let me be careful here because I do not want to create a mechanical picture of grace. Serious sin in a home does not cause the guardian angel to abandon the soul. The angel's love for the soul it is assigned to is real, ordered, and persistent. But serious sin, mortal sin, sin that has severed the soul from the life of grace, creates a spiritual environment in which the angel's ministry, particularly its consoling and protective functions, is significantly hindered. The soul in mortal sin has cut itself off from the primary conduit through which the angel's ministry flows, sanctifying grace. This is not punishment. This is physics, spiritual physics. You cannot receive the benefits of a supernatural reality while simultaneously severing your connection to the supernatural order. The connection is restored through confession. And when it is restored, when a soul returns to the state of grace, the accounts of the saints consistently describe a corresponding renewal of spiritual consolation that they associate directly with the activity of their guardian. The absence of prayer creates a different problem. Prayer is not merely communication with God. Prayer is also, in the tradition's understanding, the primary way in which a human soul participates consciously in the spiritual order. A home without prayer is a home that has chosen, at least functionally, to operate as if the invisible world does not exist. And a soul that operates as if the invisible world does not exist cannot perceive what is happening within it. The peace is available. The angel is present. But the household has, not through malice, but through neglect, and created conditions in which that peace cannot be experienced, cannot be recognized, cannot be received. The first sign of angelic presence, then, is this inexplicable, persistent, underlying peace. And the diagnosis question you must ask yourself is honest and simple. Is that what my home feels like? Not always, not perfectly, but characteristically, in its baseline, in what it returns to after disruption. If the answer is no, if what your home characteristically returns to is anxiety, agitation, irritability, a low-grade spiritual restlessness that no amount of entertainment or distraction can fully address, that is not just a psychological observation. That is spiritual information. The second sign, an intuitive awareness of moral danger. The second sign is more precise, and I want to take time with it because I think it is the sign most commonly present but least recognized for what it is. There is a faculty in the human soul that the tradition calls conscience. Most people understand conscience as the voice that tells them when they have done something wrong. That is part of it. But the tradition's account of conscience is richer and more dynamic than post-violation guilt. Conscience, when properly formed and operating in a soul in the state of grace, is also anticipatory. It alerts. It warns. It creates in the soul a kind of unease, a discomfort, a drawing back before the wrong act is committed, not only after. Now, the guardian angel's role in relation to conscience is something that several of the Church's theologians have addressed, and the picture that emerges is remarkable. The angel does not speak to the soul in words, ordinarily. The tradition is very consistent on this. Angelic communication with human souls in the ordinary course of providence happens through what the tradition calls illumination of the intellect and movement of the will. Interior promptings that feel to the person receiving them like their own thought, their own instinct, their own sense of something being right or wrong. This is not a recipe for confusion. The mystics are very clear that genuine angelic inspiration is characterized by certain qualities. It is ordered, it is oriented toward God, it is accompanied by a kind of clarity rather than anxiety, and it persists. It does not evaporate the moment you want it to. When a guardian angel is operating freely in a soul that is open to receive it, one of the primary effects is a heightening of this anticipatory moral awareness. The person finds themselves hesitating before they would normally hesitate. They find themselves feeling a particular discomfort about a situation or a content or a relationship that, on the surface, seems harmless. They find themselves pulled away from certain environments, certain conversations, certain choices by something they cannot fully articulate. Saints describe this in very concrete terms. The curé of Ars, St. John Vianney, described the influence of his guardian angel as the most consistent interior companion of his spiritual life, a presence that operated not through visions or voices, but through the quiet, persistent movement of his attention. The angel kept directing his attention toward God, kept drawing it back when it wandered, kept creating in him a discomfort with everything that was incompatible with God's presence. St. John Vianney also said something remarkable about the relationship between the guardian angel and conscience. He said that the people who confessed to him, who had the most difficulty feeling the promptings of conscience, who had the most trouble distinguishing between what was good and what only seemed good, were almost universally people who had long since stopped listening to the interior movements that their guardian had been sending them consistently for years. They had not lost the angel. They had trained themselves not to hear it. This is the mechanism of spiritual desensitization. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It happens the same way any other form of desensitization happens, through repeated exposure to a stimulus until the stimulus no longer registers. Every time a person feels the interior prompting of their guardian and overrides it, chooses the content anyway, enters the conversation anyway, makes the compromise anyway, the threshold at which that prompting registers rises slightly. Over years, over decades, over a lifetime of small choices to ignore the angel's movement. The faculty does not disappear. The angel does not stop sending, but the soul has trained itself into a kind of spiritual hearing loss. And the terrifying consequence of this hearing loss is that the soul loses its most important early warning system for moral danger, precisely at the moment in history when the number of threats requiring a functioning early warning system has never been higher. Your children are facing moral dangers that are unprecedented in their speed, their sophistication, and their accessibility. The content that is one click away from a 13-year-old in your home today would have required deliberate, sustained effort to access 25 years ago. The ideological formation happening through the devices in their pockets is happening continuously, relentlessly, and without the natural friction of physical distance and social consequence that once made moral compromise at least effortful. A child whose guardian angel is operating freely and whose conscience has been formed and kept sensitive has an interior warning system capable of navigating that environment. A child whose guardian angel is being consistently ignored, and because the home has no prayer, no sacramental life, no environment in which the interior life is valued and cultivated, that child is navigating the most complex moral landscape in human history with a dead compass. The second sign of active angelic presence in a home is this: a functioning, sensitive, anticipatory moral awareness in the members of that household. Not a legalistic anxiety, not scrupulosity, which is a disorder, not a virtue, but a genuine working capacity to feel the angel's warning before the danger arrives. The question to ask yourself in your home: do people hesitate? Do they feel things before they can explain them? Do your children come to you and say, something felt wrong about that, before they can articulate why? Is there a culture in your household of listening to those interior movements, of taking them seriously, of treating conscience not as an inconvenience to be managed, but as information to be honored? If yes, that is a sign. If not, if the household culture treats interior discomfort as an obstacle to getting what one wants, rather than as potentially divine information, then the angel is still sending, but no one is receiving. And that gap is not trivial. The third sign, a pattern of protection that exceeds coincidence. The third sign is the one most likely to be dismissed by the rationalistic mind, and yet it is the one that, in my experience, is the most consistently reported by families who are living a genuine interior life. It is the pattern of protection. Let me describe what I mean precisely. I am not talking about miraculous deliverances, though those happen and the Church has documented them extensively across the centuries. I'm talking about something more ordinary and, in its ordinariness, more theologically significant. A pattern, repeated, over time, of circumstances that, taken individually, could be explained by coincidence or good fortune, but taken together across a sustained period of sincere faith, regular prayer, and sacramental life, begin to accumulate into something that exceeds what probability would predict. The car that breaks down before the trip that would have ended in catastrophe. The impulse to take a different route that later turns out to have been significant. The unexpected encounter that arrives at precisely the moment of need. The illness that is caught early because of a doctor's appointment made on a whim. The phone call from a friend that interrupts a moment of serious temptation. The tradition is explicit about this. The guardian angel's mission includes what the Church has always called particular providence, the specific individualized care of God for each soul, mediated in significant part through the ministry of the assigned angel. This is not superstition. This is theology grounded in Scripture, in the Fathers, in the consistent teaching of the doctors of the Church. The Book of Tobit, which the Church accepts as Scripture and which is one of the most extended meditations in the entire biblical tradition on angelic ministry, presents the action of the angel Raphael precisely in these terms. Not as a series of spectacular miracles, but as a sustained pattern of guidance, protection, and providential arrangement that only becomes visible to Tobias and his family after the journey is complete and they can look back and see what had been happening all along. This is how angels most often work, not in the spectacular foreground, in the quiet background, in the pattern that reveals itself to those who have eyes trained to see it. And here's the diagnostic question. Are you tracking your life with the kind of attentiveness that would allow you to see the pattern because the pattern is there? The tradition is unambiguous about this. Every soul has a guardian. Every guardian is active. Every guardian is working with extraordinary intelligence and love toward the flourishing of the soul it is assigned to. The pattern of providential protection is always present, but it is visible only to the soul that is paying attention. And attention, real attention, the kind that can perceive the hand of God moving through the circumstances of ordinary life, is itself a spiritual faculty that must be cultivated. It atrophies without use. It is sharpened by prayer, by gratitude, by the regular practice of examining one's day with the question, where did I see God today? Where did I feel guarded? Where did something turn when it might have gone worse? This is the practice the tradition calls the exam, and it is not a pious exercise for the spiritually advanced. It is a perceptual training for the ordinary Catholic. It trains the soul to see what is already happening, to recognize the pattern that is already there, to become conscious of a protection that has always been operative but has gone unnoticed precisely because no one was looking for it. Families who practice this, who pray together at the end of the day, who name the moments of grace and protection they experienced, who speak about the spiritual life as a real, ongoing reality rather than a background assumption. These families begin to see the pattern, and once you begin to see it, it changes everything. It changes how you face difficulty, because difficulty looks different when you believe something vastly intelligent and vastly powerful is actively working to bring good from it. It changes how you make decisions, because decisions look different when you believe your guardian angel is capable of closing certain doors and opening others in ways you cannot fully anticipate. It changes how you pray, because prayer looks different when it is not a monologue into silence, but a conversation with a God who is answering through the movement of your circumstances, your conscience, and your interior life. The third sign is the pattern of protection, and it is visible to those who are looking. The question is whether your family is a family that looks, what you are missing and what it costs. I want to stop here and say something that I have been building toward through everything I have shared, something that I believe is the single most important spiritual insight I can offer a family in this particular moment of history. The three signs I have described, the atmosphere of peace, the intuitive moral awareness, the pattern of protection, are not exotic. They are not reserved for monasteries or convents or the spiritually heroic. They are the normal condition of a home that is living the faith with sincerity, with the sacraments, with daily prayer, and with the kind of interior attentiveness that the tradition has always considered simply part of what Christian life means. They are normal, and we have forgotten that they are normal. We have accepted as a culture and increasingly as a church a version of Christian life in which the supernatural is bracketed, in which faith is primarily a set of moral commitments and community affiliations and cultural identities, in which the invisible world, the angels, the saints, the constant movement of grace through the circumstances of ordinary life is real in principle but not particularly relevant in practice. And what we have lost by accepting that bracketed version of Christianity is not merely some devotional richness that the pre-modern world had and we have outgrown. What we have lost is our primary mode of defense. Because the invisible world did not agree to be bracketed. The angels did not stop working because modern Catholics decided to stop paying attention to them. The enemy did not reduce his activity because the culture decided that spiritual warfare was medieval superstition. The battle has continued at exactly the same intensity while the number of people equipped to perceive it, to engage it, and to operate in it with any competence has collapsed. I have been doing this work long enough to tell you what that collapse looks like on the ground. I see it in the cases that come to me. I see it in the families who arrive having lived for years, sometimes decades, in homes where the sacraments have been neglected, where prayer has been replaced by the ambient noise of entertainment, where the sacramentals have been packed away as embarrassing relics of a less enlightened era, and who are now experiencing the consequences of that long vulnerability in ways they cannot explain and do not have the theological framework to address. The darkness does not enter dramatically. It does not announce itself. It moves into the vacuum created by the absence of light, and it moves slowly enough that by the time the family notices something is wrong, the inexplicable anxiety, the breakdown in relationships, the spiritual deadness that no activity can relieve, the process has been underway for years, and then they come to me and they want to know why. The answer is almost always the same in its essentials, though it takes different forms in different families. You stopped paying attention to the invisible world, and the invisible world did not return the favor. This is the cost. And I am not saying it to produce guilt. I am saying it because the cost is real and the restoration is available, and the path from one to the other is not complicated, though it is demanding. Your guardian angel has not given up. The peace is available. The moral clarity is available. The pattern of protection is available. But you have to create the conditions in which these things can operate. You have to reopen what you have closed. The deeper question. Here is what I want you to sit with for a moment before I move to what can be done. The three signs I have described are simultaneously signs of angelic presence and, in their absence, signs of something else. Not necessarily of demonic activity, though that is always a possibility that must be considered in serious cases, but at minimum signs of spiritual poverty, of a household operating without the protection and guidance it was designed to receive. And I want to ask you a question that I suspect most people who have watched this far have been quietly asking themselves already. Which describes your home? Not in the idealized version of your home, not on your best day or during Advent when the family is briefly more focused, or in the week after a retreat when everyone is temporarily more serious about the faith. In the ordinary, in the habitual, in the characteristic texture of daily life in your household, is there peace, not manufactured, not forced, but the particular quality of peace that belongs to a home under angelic guard? Is there a living conscience in the adults, in the children, a sensitivity to the interior promptings of grace that functions as a real moral compass rather than a theoretical one? Is there a pattern of protection that you notice and name and give thanks for, a pattern that you can trace back across the months and years of your family's life and recognize the hand of something vastly wiser and more careful than chance? If the answer to all three is yes, not perfectly, not without failure, but characteristically in the baseline quality of your spiritual life, then what you have is precious, and my word to you is protect it. Protect it fiercely. The conditions that have allowed the angelic presence in your home to operate freely must be maintained and deepened, because the pressure on those conditions from the surrounding culture has never been greater. If the answer to one or more of those questions is no, or if you honestly do not know, if you have lost the capacity to evaluate the spiritual quality of your own home because you have been too long inside the fog, then what I am about to say in the next section may be the most practically important thing you hear. The spiritual physics of restoration. I want to talk about restoration, specifically about the mechanism by which the conditions for full angelic activity are restored in a home and a family that has, through whatever combination of neglect and distraction and the slow erosion of faith under cultural pressure, allowed those conditions to deteriorate. Because this is not complicated, it is demanding. But it is not complicated. The first and most urgent element of restoration is the sacrament of confession. I have said this before in other contexts, and I will keep saying it until I run out of breath, because it is the most consistently underutilized source of spiritual restoration available to the Catholic family. Confession is not primarily about guilt relief, though the relief that comes from a good confession is real and deep. Confession is the sacrament by which sanctifying grace is restored to a soul that has lost it through mortal sin, and by which venial sin, the accumulated weight of daily compromise and small choices against the good, is addressed, named, and placed before the mercy of God. And the restoration of sanctifying grace is not a small thing in the context of what I have been describing. Remember, the guardian angel's ministry flows most powerfully through the soul that is in the state of grace. Confession is literally the act by which the primary conduit of angelic ministry is reopened. I have spoken with many people over the course of this ministry who describe a remarkable experience following a sincere, thorough confession after a long absence from the sacrament. They describe something shifting, something settling, a quality of peace returning that they had forgotten existed, a sensitivity to interior promptings that had been dulled for years suddenly sharpening. They do not always have the theological language to describe what happened. But I do. The angel's ministry was restored to full capacity. The second element is the establishment of a genuine daily prayer life in the home. And I want to be precise here about what daily prayer means in this context, because I think there are many Catholic families who pray and who say grace before meals, who attend Mass on Sunday, who turn to God in moments of crisis, who would describe themselves as praying families, but who have, in fact, nothing that functions as a structured daily encounter with God. The distinction matters. Structured daily prayer, the Rosary, the Liturgy of the Hours, morning offering, the family exam, does something different from crisis prayer or occasional devotion. It creates a rhythm. And rhythm, in the spiritual life, as in the physical life, changes the fundamental condition of the organism that lives within it. A family that prays together every morning creates over time a household atmosphere in which the interior life is simply part of the air. The children grow up assuming that the supernatural is real because they have been given daily experience of the posture of orienting toward it. The adults maintain a reference point, a daily return to God, that prevents the week's accumulation of distraction and compromise from hardening into habit. And the guardian angels of each member of that household operate within a spiritual environment that has been, through the family's daily prayer, actively and consciously opened to the invisible world. The third element is the proper ordering of the home through sacramentals. Holy water at the threshold, blessed crucifixes on the walls, a blessed image of Our Lady in a place of prominence, the brown scapular worn by the family members who have enrolled. These are not decorations, and they are not superstitions. They are physical matter that has been set apart by the Church, matter through which, in ways that are real if secondary, the grace of God operates in the spatial environment of the home. The tradition is consistent on this. A home that is properly ordered through blessed objects is a home that has been, in a real sense, claimed for God. And a home that has been claimed for God is a home in which the angelic ministry operates with a kind of spiritual freedom, a freedom from the particular interference that demonic forces exert in unconsecrated environments. I have gone into homes in serious spiritual distress, homes where the darkness was palpable, where even natural explanations for the disturbance could not account for everything that was happening. And I have witnessed the change that occurs when holy water is brought in, when blessed crucifixes are placed on the walls, when the Rosary is prayed for the first time in those rooms. The change is not always immediate. The spiritual environment of a home that has been in distress for years does not shift in a single afternoon, but it shifts. And the direction of the shift is consistent and reliable and grounded in 2,000 years of the Church's experience with exactly these tools in exactly these situations. The fourth element is the cultivation of what I want to call spiritual attentiveness, the practice of paying attention to the invisible world with the same regularity and seriousness that a family brings to paying attention to the physical world. This is the practice of the exam I mentioned earlier. It is the practice of speaking as a family about the spiritual life as a real ongoing reality, of naming grace when you see it, of speaking of the guardian angels as real and present and active, of teaching children to say good morning to their guardian angel, to ask for the angel's guidance before decisions, to give thanks at the end of the day for the protection and prompting they have received. This sounds simple. It is not easy in a culture that treats all of this as charming but not serious. But it is the practice by which the perceptual capacity to see the three signs is developed and maintained. And without that perceptual capacity, the signs go unseen even when they are fully present. Emotional reflection. I want to step back from the theological precision for a moment because I think there is something I have been circling around that needs to be said plainly. The reason I find the subject of guardian angels so important, more important than perhaps any single element of popular Catholic piety, is not primarily theological, though the theology is rich and demanding and worth a lifetime of study. It is personal. I have been in rooms where the darkness was so thick and so hostile that the physical sensation of it was undeniable even to people who had no particular spiritual sensitivity. I have sat with families in the aftermath of years of spiritual neglect, watching the consequences of a long vacancy play out in broken relationships, in children who had lost their faith, in adults who had forgotten what peace felt like. And I have also been present at the other thing. I have been in homes, not many, but enough, where the atmosphere of what I described as the first sign was so present, so unmistakable, that it was the first thing you noticed when you crossed the threshold. A stillness, a quality of depth. Not the absence of difficulty. These were not families without struggle, but a foundation under the struggle that held. I have spoken with parents in those homes about their children and what they described, the children's intuitive avoidance of moral danger, their sensitivity to interior promptings, their matter-of-fact relationship with the invisible world matched exactly what the tradition describes as the signs of a household under genuine angelic protection. And I have been present for the moments when the pattern of protection revealed itself. When the pieces of a family's recent history came together and the shape of a providence they had not fully noticed suddenly became visible, and the father or the mother looked up with an expression I have seen many times and that I can only describe as the expression of someone who has just remembered something they had almost forgotten was real. The guardian angel is there. It has always been there. It has not stopped working because you stopped noticing it. But there is something irreplaceable about the moment when a family begins to notice again, when the scales fall from the eyes, when the invisible world, which has been present and active all along, suddenly becomes visible again in the particular mercy of a conversion, a return to prayer, a restoration of the sacramental life. That is the moment I am working toward in everything I say. Not fear, not guilt, not the grim satisfaction of having identified the problem. That moment of recognition, that recovery of a perception the modern world has worked very hard to take from you. Your guardian angel is real. The peace it brings is available. The moral clarity it offers is available. The pattern of protection it weaves through the circumstances of your life is available. And you are not too far gone for any of it. No one is. The tradition does not describe any condition of spiritual desolation from which these gifts cannot be restored, as long as the soul is willing to be restored. The angel's love for the soul it is assigned to is not conditional on the soul's worthiness. It is permanent. It is ordered. It is patient in ways that should make us ashamed of our impatience with each other. The question is simply whether you will create the conditions for that love to operate. I want to end with something practical. because everything I have said is useless without action. Today, not this week. Today, the first thing, find out when confession is available at your nearest parish and go. If you cannot go today, go tomorrow. If it has been years, that does not matter. If the sin you are carrying feels too heavy or too old or too complex, that does not matter either. That is precisely what the sacrament exists for. Go. The second thing, tonight as a family, or if you are alone, then alone, but pray one rosary. Just one. Not perfectly. Not with full understanding. Just do it. Pray it in the room of your home where your family spends the most time. Pray it out loud. The third thing, get holy water from a church and bring it home. Bless the threshold of every door. Speak a prayer of consecration over your home. Put a crucifix on the wall in every main room. These are not magical acts. They are declarations of ownership. You are declaring who this house belongs to, and the invisible world takes such declarations seriously. The fourth thing, begin the practice of the exam. Tonight, before you sleep, spend 5 minutes asking, where did I feel guarded today? What prompted me to hesitate, to reconsider, to choose differently than I might have? Give thanks for those moments. Name them, speak them aloud if you can, and then look for the pattern, over days, over weeks, over months. Write it down if that helps. The pattern is there. The angel is working. It has been working all along. Your task is simply to begin paying attention. Because the God who set an angel over your life from before you were born is not a God who gives up. He is a God who waits with a patience that surpasses anything we can imagine for the moment when a soul turns back and says, I am ready. I am paying attention. I am open. That can be today. That can be right now, wherever you are. The guardian angel assigned to you has never once looked away from the face of God on your behalf. It has never rested. It has never given up. It has been bringing you here to this moment in ways you do not yet fully understand. Perhaps it is time to begin noticing. If this message reached something in you, something that has been waiting to be reached, do not let that movement pass. Act on it. Go to confession. Pray the rosary. Bless your home. And share this with someone whose household you have been praying for, because the angel working in your life may be using you right now to reach theirs. God is with you. The angels are with you, and neither of them is finished.